we've got that handing over. God said, okay, let them go. And their hearts got darkened and their minds got darkened. And therefore, God handed them over to degrading passions. Their females exchanged natural relations for unnatural. Males likewise gave up natural relations with females and burned with lust for one another. Males did shameful things with males and thus received in their own persons the due penalty for their perversity. Now, we have options in the way that this is being interpreted. Verses like this are being interpreted now. We have options from, this is Paul condemning all homosexual behavior of any kind. That is the traditional view. Some traditional views also throw in orientation or desire, which doesn't seem to appear here. They throw in extra. But the traditional view says homosexual behavior, Paul condemns all of here. A second way of looking at passages like this, including this one, but also in 1 Corinthians 6 and in 1 Timothy 1, is to say Paul was condemning certain kinds of behavior that were homosexual relations, but were not, that Paul didn't have access to, for instance, monogamous homosexual committed relationships. That he's talking about exploitations, forms of exploitation, right? And so the argument that's made by some is that because of that, Paul could not assess, since he didn't have it near him, Paul could not assess committed homosexual relationships that were monogamous. And therefore, those stay outside the crosshairs here. And that debate goes on. In fact, all of the major mainline denominations in the United States, and I think Canada, Steve London, all the major denominations have had some form of schism in their national or international body because of this issue. We probably aren't going to solve it tonight. Suffice it to say, I'm glad to talk about it in the Q&A afterward and talk about not only what I see in the scripture or what we see in the scripture, but talk about implications of it. A third way of looking at this, by the way, if I gave you the two interpretive versions of this, a third way to look at it is to say that first one is true, right? That Paul could not accept any form of homosexual behavior, but there are things that we've learned after Scripture to be God's will that Scripture didn't get fully to. For instance, slavery is okay in Scripture. We eventually got to the idea that people shouldn't own people, and we think that's a tenet of God's. So is homosexual behavior, is homosexuality in that bucket of things that, due to cultural restriction or due to something, the people who were writing and collected in Scripture didn't end up getting to about what God is like. I'll discuss that in the after questions a little more. All right. But just so we know that some versions of readings of this passage have seen homosexual behavior as the absolute nadir of human behavior. That is the worst thing you could do. But look where Paul goes next in showing what happens when we suppress the truth about God, don't worship God or give thanks, and God gives us over to that and lets us go in the sort of skewed world or the staticky world that produces between people. Look at what's next. Since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God handed them over to their undiscerning mind to do what is improper. See if you find yourself anywhere on this list. They are filled with every form of wickedness, evil, greed, and malice, full of envy. Anybody tuning in here? Murder, rivalry, treachery, spite. They are gossips, scandalmongers. They hate God. They are insolent, haughty, boastful, ingenious in their wickedness, and rebellious toward parents. I know none of you ever were, but there are some people on the earth who are rebellious toward parents. Paul catches them in the net here. They are senseless, faithless, heartless, ruthless. And although they know the just decree of God that all who practice such things deserve death, they not only do them, but give approval to those who practice them. So they've gone beyond, oops, I feel bad about this, but I can't seem to stop, to, no, there's nothing wrong with this, at whatever the, scandal mongering or treachery or disobedience to parents or whatever it is. They've gone past, I know, but what's the big deal? Over to, I think we ought to behave this way. That's Paul's picture of the decline that comes when we don't worship God and acknowledge God's divinity and character. Right? And that needs saving for Paul. The good news of 16 and 17 is about this predicament in which humanity find ourselves.